maybe larger enterprises might appreciate and would be willing to pay for it. And we thought, okay, let's put that behind like a premium. We call it Typesense Pro at the time, and then we said, you pay us. I think we charged probably like $500 a year or something, which is like we were just testing the waters out,
Exactly.
and did not go well at all. Because one thing we realized was, well, first of all, we didn't have a free trial, so explaining the feature to users was it's a challenge by itself. And then I realized even if we did offer a free trial, the number of people wanting that is actually much lesser than the larger population of like people using all the other features. So that itself was like a not setting it up for a good conversion rate, I guess. But more importantly, we realized this in hindsight. Once we did open source those features that we previously held back, then turns out people actually started using it more often and started giving us feedback on how to shape the feature, some bugs that were found in the feature, etc. So that's when we realized when we actually publish something open source, we get way more feedback than if it's held back and only given to a select few paying customers.
Very
So
interesting.
that was like a nice learning experience for us. That putting
Very
something out in
interesting.
the open source it's sure you're putting it out for free, but you're actually also getting a lot of value from the community as well, in terms of just people using it and giving you feedback is like so valuable, I would say. So I'm glad we
We'll
went down
definitely.
this route.
That's great to hear, and we'll definitely touch on this a little more. Why the open core model didn't quite like stick well with Typesense and the friction that was there, the tension.
Yep.
I will definitely circle back to this. We're live, by the way, so
Okay, cool.
let's welcome everyone tuning in. Thanks so much, Jason. Really appreciate the opportunity to do this interview and demo. Thanks for your time.
Of course, yep. Yep. Thank you for having us. Thank you for reaching out, and glad to be here.
Of course, of course. And when I reached out, I saw recently that you hired a software engineer for my hometown, Thessaloniki, in Greece. And so, I was like, oh man. And then I read again, like I visited your Twitter. I saw like all your hot takes about like bootstrapping, being revenue funded. And so I definitely wanted to do this. Thanks so much once again. Oh, and we can see Fanny over here. We pulled him up in Thessaloniki. And so, yeah, that
Awesome.
was
Yeah,
very cool.
small world.
Small world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when you
curious.
reached out, it was like, wow, it's like of all places, it's like,
I know, right?
yeah, it
And
was
actually,
pretty nice.
actually curious, like real quickly, 1 minute, if you could tell us like what that hiring process looked like for you, and why did you make the decision to hire Fanis? Hypothetically.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so for this particular role, we actually did advertise on LinkedIn. So we put up a job description on LinkedIn and had folks apply to it. And specifically for this role, we wanted like time zone coverage in like the EU region. So we ended up saying, okay, Greece is like nice in this middle somewhere, covering both like Asia Pacific, like on the one side, and maybe a little bit of the East Coast US. So it's like pretty overlaps with our time zone existing time zone coverage as well. So yeah, so that's how we did it, which is actually atypical. We for and the role that we hired Fanis into, it's a software engineer in the solutions engineering side, and so we needed someone to like quickly jump in and like build prototypes for users and help us with our integrations, so maintaining the client libraries, and as our core features evolved on the Typesense server, building like projects for people to use as reference
Mm-hmm,
implementations.
mm-hmm.
So a lot of like we needed someone who had a breadth of experience with like a variety of different stacks and was also willing to learn new things on the fly. And also wouldn't be shy to like jump on calls and talk to people. And I
Yes.
think that's a very hard mix of combination of interests to find in an engineer. So I'm glad we found Fanis.
I love it. I love it.
So yeah, like he's been doing amazing work. Like he's put out a bunch of integrations already, a bunch of demos, and talking with users and getting feedback. So yeah, it's
I
been
love it.
awesome.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to highlight this to make sure that people here in Greece and in my hometown Thessaloniki see that this is actually an option that they can pursue, working for an open source company and building in public. And so, very glad we talked about this. And we'll circle back on hiring and how you manage that up to date, because being bootstrapped, being revenue funded, you have to balance your cash flow. and the considerations are different compared to VC-backed companies. So we'll definitely circle back to that. Okay,
Sure.
so to start, to start the interview, why don't you tell us at the high level about Typesense, what it does, who it is it for, how many people at the company? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so Typesense is an open source in-memory search engine. And typically when people think search engine, they, especially if you're not from a development background, you think, oh, it's like Google and all of that. But those are consumer-facing search engines. They go out and crawl data. With Typesense, we essentially let like sites and apps bring their own first-party data into an engine like ours and then search through it super fast. So you can build like autocomplete experiences. You can build all the filters that you see in like search results page, for example. If you see, we also have like machine learning features. So if you wanted to build recommendations, if you wanted to build similarity search, image search, if you wanted to have like a conversational, like chat GPT style conversation over your own data, like over your own JSON data. So anything related to search, but as it relates to first party data, like think e-commerce, for example, or think a nutrition tracking app, for example, like MacroFactor is one of our customers. And logitech.com, if you go to logitech.com, on the search bar there is powered by our software. And then codeacademy.com, like the search bar there is powered by our software. And then uh, you know John Hopkins University, maybe, for example, the course catalog that's powered by our software. It spans a wide breadth of domains. We even have like one of Air Asia's like aircraft maintenance division use us for like parts search within the
Wow.
within one of their products. So it spans a wide breadth of domains. That's the nice thing about search. Just like how any business needs a database at the end of the day to store their data. If you have a database, and it grows in size, you eventually need to search fast through it. And that's where Typesense enters the picture, where you take a copy of the data that you want to search through fast, we put it in memory, index it in an efficient way, so you can then build super fast search experiences on top of it. And so today we serve about 10, actually, we already crossed 11 billion searches per month this month, just on Typesense Cloud. So since it's open source, people and freely downloadable, people can self-host it, and we do not add any like analytics or tracking to self-hosted clusters. So we have no idea how many people and what scale they're using that. But just anecdotally, I've heard here and there some folks like there's one e-commerce platform in Turkey. It's like the Shopify of Turkey. Uh, Last I heard, they told me they do, and this is public, they mentioned this in public, they serve like 3 billion searches just by themselves on their Typesense Cloud cluster. So if just that
That's
one
amazing.
person is doing 3 billion searches per month, I'm pretty sure it's like in the easily, tens of billions of searches probably that people are hosting with Typesense self-hosted. And by design, we don't know who they are, which, from a privacy perspective, that's good. But that's the model that we're following.
Very, very cool. Thanks so much for the introduction. And, that model, we will circle back to it because as an enterprise self-hosting Typesense, you can just go ahead and do it for free. You don't even need to purchase an enterprise license of any sort. And
Yep.
so as an open source founder, ourselves, like, I mentioned earlier how Algora will be fully open source in the next months too. And we're in the process of like picking the license, discussing, like choosing the model, the packaging, definitely myself very excited to hear about this, and I think other people who tune in to this podcast would be very interested as well. Very cool, very cool. And today, the number of how many years Typesense has been around, the number of customers, the number of employees.
Yep. So we've been around since 2015, or I should say the project was around. We started working on it in like end of 2015, and then we formed a company around it in like 2019, like a dedicated company. Before this, was under another like umbrella company we used to have. But anyway, so 2019 was when we incorporated, and then we started working on it full time in 2020. And today we have we're an 8-person team. And we probably have like thousands of customers at this point on Typesense Cloud. And, growing fast, more, happily growing and profitable through it all.
I can go. All right. Thank you so much. Would you like to dive into a demo before we discuss about the business more?
Sure, sure. Yep.
Let's do it. Awesome.
Awesome. All right. Let me share my screen. Okay. So let me start with uh, the homepage. So essentially, what Typesense does is it lets you build, uh, let's say, fast search experiences like this. Where every key press like returns results in like milliseconds and with typo tolerance. Like that's, for example, one of the features that we have is like I butchered the spelling for strawberry. It's still pulling up results for strawberry right here. So that is what Typesense is built for, like typo tolerance. And then on like let me show you a couple of other like sites. Like so, this is Logitech, for example. They use Typesense right here. As I search for this autocomplete, this is powered by Typesense right here on logitech.com. And then let's see, what were the other ones? Yeah, as mentioned, Code Academy. So this course search, this is powered by Typesense right here. And then another interesting example is what we call catalog browsing. So this is another one of our customers, hem.com. So on here, if I go into any of these, so besides autocomplete, so if I search for a rug, for example, this is powered by Typesense. So shows you product results, material samples, designers, etc. But in addition to that, if I go into any of these category pages, all these are powered by Typesense as well. Oh, I filtered it down too much. Yeah, there you go. So as I keep applying these filters, these are all just query sent to Typesense, and then it returns results, and they use that to render the grid right here. So yeah, so this is among many other users using it, but essentially search, autocomplete, and then recommendations, and then similarity search, and then catalog browsing, we call it. So you think search and you think, oh, there's a search bar and you type, but it's actually the same underlying technology can power like a whole bunch of other things. Now, this is all on the consumer facing side. Now in Typesense Cloud, essentially, when you sign up, you can create a new cluster. You pick how much RAM and CPU you need, and we have like docs on how to do that. Once you click launch, within like 5 minutes, you have a cluster that looks like this. And then there's a dashboard for you to explore the, some stats about the cluster right here, how it's being used. We have a search dashboard to explore the data set right here. You can search for stuff right here. Change some search settings over here. Say for example, I want to give maybe maybe the model the highest priority, followed by make, etc. So you can assign weightage to different fields. You can assign numeric weights if you want to. You can set up synonyms. You can set up, custom business logic where you say if the user types in a particular search term, then take any of these actions like pinning documents in particular positions, or filtering documents, or dynamically changing the sort order, and then stop word. So there's a lot of things that you can actually configure behind what you see as a simple search bar, and that business logic is what goes into building something like Typesense. It's not just the full text search piece; it's all the additional things that that you typically need to build a full-fledged search experience. And that's how we've kind of like a little bit of backstory, I guess, is when we started out, we were actually using Elasticsearch at different companies, me and my co-founder. And the frustration of getting all of this to work with Elasticsearch and scaling your Elasticsearch cluster, we would constantly run into issues. That frustration is what led us to start Typesense. And with Typesense, we just took the site and app search pieces and then made it work out of the box for, let's say, 80% of the use cases, and then give you like knobs to fine tune it for the next 15%. So it works fairly effortlessly. And the last 5% of features, I think that's where Elasticsearch becomes way complicated in the service of those 5% of features. and blows up your learning curve, etc. So with Typesense, we specifically said no to those 5% of features, and just focused on site and app search piece in like an opinionated, out of the box way, right here. So that's I guess Typesense in a nutshell.
Love it, love it. Thank you so much for the quick demo. And as you said earlier, someone can actually self-host it on-prem,
Yep,
their own servers.
that's right. Yeah, it's literally just one command to like self-host it. Depending on where, if you do Docker or like, Homebrew, or we have deb and RPM packages with different distributions. So it's literally just downloading it and installing it, and you're up and running.
Super cool. Very, very nice. And we showed all websites, I think, to both the cloud and the .org. We showed the
Yep.
documentation.
Yep.
Very, very easy to start. And so, what's a company or a team expected to pay if they use the cloud?
So cloud, it depends on the configuration that you pick. So for example, if you're on the 0 point, like the lowest configuration that we have, for example, it's 2160 a month, and includes 512 MB of RAM, 2 vCPUs with 1 hour burst, and you can pick any of the 26 regions that we have. Uh, Now, if you want high availability, which is we'll provision 3 nodes in 3 data centers. So even if one node goes down, or you're upgrading a node, for example, then the other 2 will continue servicing traffic. So it's highly available. If you turn that on, then it basically increases the price because we're now spinning up 3 nodes. It's like 8640 a month on this. Now, of course, it depends on the size of your data set. Like if you have, the size of your data set, meaning both the number of records and also the number of fields you're indexing inside every record. So if you, for example, only index, like this demo, for example, this has about 2 million recipes. And I believe I indexed only like 3 or 4 fields in this data set right here. This takes about, if I remember correctly, I think it takes about 1.2 GB of RAM or something for 2 million records. But that's because I'm only indexing like 2 or 3 fields per record. So the record size is fairly tiny. But sometimes 2 million records, if you have 20 fields indexed, then you're going to need more RAM to index. And there's a formula to that. Usually if it's X is the size of your data set, you require 2x to 3x RAM to index that. And then you pick CPU based on how much concurrency you need. And then this particular feature called the Search Delivery Network, that is what's unique about Typesense Cloud. Not that you can't do it when you're self-hosted, it's just that the amount of work that has gone into making this work on Typesense Cloud is non-trivial. We make it convenient in Typesense Cloud, which is basically once you pick a 3-region search delivery network or 5 regions, you can pick multiple regions to distribute the data to. So depending on where the query is originating from, it'll make its way to the node that's closest to the user. So like, for example,
Like a cache, basically, or a CDN almost for search.
so it is like a CDN, but it actually goes even one step above a CDN. And I say that because in a CDN, like you said, only the most frequently used items are cached at the edges. Whereas here, we're actually replicating the entire data set to each of the regions that you mentioned here. So, which means that if a search query originates, let's say in Greece, for example, it'll probably make its way to what, maybe Zurich or Spain, maybe. And that node in, let's say Zurich, like that node in Zurich will be the one that fully services the request without having to talk to any of the other nodes. So it essentially reduces the latency of, whereas in a CDN, if you, let's say, for example, if you talk to Zurich and then Zurich doesn't have the data, it has to then talk back to the origin to go fetch the data and then cache it. Like that is not how our system works here. This SDN is actually completely full copies of the data set replicated in real time to each of the nodes that you pick. So essentially, it solves a lot of like latency problems. Like even I've calculated this, or I've read this up, between US East Coast and West Coast, for example, it's like a 70 millisecond network latency typically. And you can like save that amount. Like imagine if every key press incurs an extra 70 millisecond, that's what you get to save with like a search delivery network.
That's super cool. Thanks so much for elaborating on that. And like, can I ask, like, in a few sentences, how you pulled that off?
Uh, there's a traffic routing layer. Let me just put it that way. There's a traffic routing layer, like a global traffic routing layer, and that's where the magic happens. It evaluates how close, you know, it monitors latency, usage of the nodes, CPU usage of the nodes, etc., and then routes traffic around.
Very cool, very cool. And I understand that you cannot spill the beans on the secret sauce, but you already went into a lot of detail. And I understand that it's not just the engine powering it all, but it's all these peripheral sort of like utilities and tools so that you can service the use cases you need as a company for
Yep.
your customers. And so I really like that. I understand it. And I understand that the market opportunity is huge because as long as there exist databases and data to retrieve, we need something like Typesense. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. Would you like to, maybe transition into how you built the company to date? Typesense is revenue funded. Everyone working at the company is paid from revenue, and you showed us that pricing is very, very generous, and for self-hosters, it's like free. And so, tell us like from the early days how you approached this, the fact that we're gonna sort of like forego some benefits of the VC route, and we're gonna play on hard mode, but that is for the longevity of the company. And so curious to hear how you thought about it with your co-founder early on. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So when we started out in 2015, it was mainly, a project to scratch our own itch. It was like, hey, Elasticsearch is this hard. Why is it this hard? Is how the journey started. Just researching, trying to understand search engines, and that's when we realized, oh, there's actually an opportunity to build a much smaller footprint product, and that we might find useful. And then we realized, okay, let's just open source it, and get feedback. And that's a whole other topic by itself, like why we decided to open source it. But behind the scenes, we didn't have any like strong opinions of whether we wanted to raise VC funds or not at that point in time, like back in like 2018 when we first open sourced it, because we had ourselves, like both my co-founder and I, had worked at other VC back or were working at other VC back companies, so we know the mechanics of how VC back companies work, um, etc. But then we left our full-time job, started working on Typesense, and then as we started gaining traction, we started getting inbound interest from VCs wanting to invest in Typesense, and I've probably spoken to at least like 35 different VCs at this point, and these are like brand name VCs, and zero of them we reached out. It was all like cold inbound. So I'm grateful that we are still in that position right here. But in those conversations is when I started learning more about how the interaction between VCs and founders are typically, not just from what the VCs were telling me, but I started reaching out to like other VC-backed founders who raised funds in the past. And while many of them had good things to say, the some of the bad things that I heard were so bad, were so scary, that it could literally like risk the company and the product, regardless of how good the product is. That you can basically lose the entire product just because of things that are completely outside of your control. Um, as a company, like I've heard crazy things like VC firms being, bought out, or some arm of a fund getting shut down or whatnot. It's like a whole variety of different things that happen outside of your control, completely unrelated to your product, but that ends up affecting your company in such a profound way. And then also because once you take funding, you've sold your stock, and it's a one and done deal. Unless they're willing to sell it back to you at a higher price, for example. So typically when you raise funds, it's for life, for the life of the company type thing. So it wasn't an easily reversible decision as well. And so here's some of the things that led us down to this. I think the most concrete one was, what I realized was, so in a company, at the end of the day, you're going to sell something to make money. And what I realized was there's two main ways to make money. One is selling to customers who are using your core product, and you make money in exchange for the value you're giving. The other way to make money is you sell your company's stock and to investors. And as the stock, and the way money gets made there is only when the stock appreciates in prices over multiple rounds of funding, so that when the next round is raised, the stock prices are appreciated, based on all your metrics, etc., and what your projected growth is. That's when your stock price increase. That's when the investors and all stockholders make money. So if you look at it from another lens, now you have two groups of customers. One group is buying your stock, one group is buying your core product. So when you think of it that way, now you have two product lines to service in parallel. And the sad thing is, a lot of the time, the things that are needed for your stock price to appreciate are incompatible with the things that your customers would appreciate. The classic thing in this is every VC-backed company eventually ends up going up market, like raising their prices, doing a rug pull of some sort, one way or the other, and that's fully explainable and understandable because for the way stock prices appreciate is by showing good revenue growth. And if you wanted to show fast revenue growth, would you rather spend your time going after like, $21 per month, users, or would you want to go after like, $100,000, per year users, right? So that's when suddenly the folks that help build you up in the initial stages of the company, those customers are left behind because now all the prices are being raised and all the focus is on the like the 100K ACV customers, and that essentially happens because of this group of customers, which is the investors wanting the stock price to appreciate. Uh, so I feel like that eventually that's the whole cycle of VC-backed companies from what I've seen over and over again, even as a user of these products from many of these VC-backed companies, is the eventual cycle of like everyone going up market that leaves the space, another startup comes up, and then they also eventually go up market. Like that cycle keeps repeating. With Typesense, what I didn't want to do was repeat that cycle. I feel like if everyone is trying to focus on like the up market, like if everyone is looking at that as like the holy grail of like uh, of what it means to run a sustainable company according to them, for me that actually leaves a perpetual space in like the small medium, maybe, I mean, we do have like enterprise customers, but that's not the end all for us. Like we want to be comfortably in like the small and medium business market, uh, and also service like enterprises who are exploring new technologies, for example, at an affordable price, and stay consistent with that pricing over like a long duration of time without having to like go up market and raise prices, etc. Uh, so that was one big thing. The other thing was I didn't want selling stock to end up risking the core product, because if you sell too much of your stock, especially as a founder, if you no longer control the company, then the product that the company can head in a direction which is no longer under what you think is best for the for the product, and suddenly you end up seeing a lot of feature creep, for example, where just to attract new revenue segments, for example, you end up adding a whole bunch of complex features, and you keep adding features on top of each other, and you eventually end up becoming like a super complicated product because you have to serve so many different needs in the market to be able to build up revenue. That's another thing that I didn't want to happen with Typesense, is that we wanted to keep the product as lean as possible and stay true to what the goals that we had and have as we're running the product, which is it has to be super lightweight, it has to be out of the box, works well, an in-memory fast search engine without bloating it up. And I feel like going down the VC path, eventually you also end up with bloated software with a whole bunch of features that, sure, everyone says, oh, it's super versatile, but then for each individual user, it's like it's so complicated to figure out which of those users or which of those features to use, etc. So yeah, so we didn't want Typesense the company to affect Typesense the product. I felt like that's what would happen if we sell stock in Typesense the company. So which is why we're like, let's just not go down that path. Now, I'm able to say all of this because thankfully, while we were having these conversations, our revenue was also growing really fast and we became profitable. Now, of course, a company needs money to survive. And so I've come to look at it as VC is just one way of raising funds. There are what I'm not a fan of is looking at VC as the only way. And sadly, I feel like there's a lot of folks that look at VC all the glamour that comes with raising VC funds. Like it's almost like raising VC funds itself is like a prestigious thing by itself. That's what like I feel like I'm trying to like with all the things that I post on Twitter. That's what I'm trying to like say that hey, that's like sure you raised funds, but that's not the end goal here. Like the end goal is to use that to build a solid product and that you can a self-sustaining solid product that you can continue to grow without having to rely on external capital. Like that is the end goal of building a sustainable business. But I feel like the glamour that surrounds VC fundraisers has like inverted the equation for many like new founders, especially. And that's why I'm like, hey, here are all the other things you need to consider, baggage that you need to consider when you raise VC funds. And there are other alternatives, like for example, go consult or don't quit your day job and
Hmm.
do it as a nights and weekends project. That's what we did, for example, for the first 5 years or so. So there are multiple ways to make money. Of course, it is like you said, playing the game on hard mode. But I feel like once you you know get past the initial grind of let's say 5 or 6 years, and then you start seeing like traction, and you haven't like sacrificed your company stock, it's I would say like the best feeling ever. Source me, which is like these days I just wake up, the only thing that I need to focus on is making sure we're focused on the top priorities that our customers are telling us, instead of having to worry about what the next VC board meeting and how we're going to show growth metrics and all of that. It's just I feel like it's such a big distraction from product building, at least in my opinion, that I'm glad we're in this position where we're able to do all of the things we wanted to do, and also stay true to servicing customers as the first priority, through all of it.
I love it. I love it. Man, thank you so much for unpacking this. And it's very well thought out. You gave out a lot of reasons. And surely it's nuance. Not every individual can take down this route. Maybe some entrepreneurs that just cannot afford it, like not having that funding to like kickstart their new business idea. What I find most interesting here is that, first of all, you said it yourself, there's a long line of companies who, with the VC backed route, ended up, and shitifying their product. Not caring about their SMB customers and sort of like throwing them under the bus, needing to move up market fast, and that bloated the products. So we changed licenses. So we have all these examples. Here's what I find the most interesting. Like most times, VC-backed companies, the pricing and packaging of the products early on are such to facilitate mass adoption, right? And conversely, when a company is bootstrapped or like funded with revenue, they have to monetize more heavily early on. What I find super interesting with Typesense is that your pricing and packaging is almost reflective of a VC company because it's like free for tons of people. They can just get started, they can run with it, and somehow you still made it work in the early days to sustain yourselves. So I find this very, very interesting how you pull that off. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so for us, so our desire for Typesense is actually two pronged. One is, of course, we want to make money through it and sustain ourselves. Uh, uh, but the other thing is also actually adoption of Typesense is also another goal for us, and it's from the perspective of the existing search engines out there in the market that are options for developers are either way too complicated or way too expensive. So that space is what we wanted to fill, and the way we're going to be able to do that is by making sure Typesense is as accessible as possible. And you know I would say it actually also helped us in reverse as well, where when we give something out for especially in the open source community, what I've realized that when we put something out in the open, we actually get a ton of feedback, and I'm so grateful that this happens from the community on,
Mm-hmm.
what is working, like how the feature is working for this particular use case or not working for this other use case this a set of users have. So that level of engagement from your users, I would say, is something unique in the open source ecosystem, compared to like if it was closed source, and even if we were to give it out for free, a perpetual free tier, I think the level of engagement, somehow I find a difference between like products that are closed source and free versus products that are open source and free to self-host. That open source mindset of collaboration somehow I would say helps build better products, that collaborative nature. So that's one of the reasons that we said, okay, let's also, besides the adoption piece, which, putting out something in the open source, it helps a lot with adoption. We basically, our one of our goals is to get Typesense to be the default. Like, if you think search, hopefully, just like how you think database today, probably it's like, Postgres and MySQL, for example. Um, we'd want Typesense to be that thing for search, and you know going open source helps build that trust to be that default thing in users stacks. uh, but in addition to that, you also get the benefit back from the community because everyone is collaborating and helping build this product as a cohesive thing that serves a variety of different use cases. uh, so I would say it's in addition to making money, because we also have this other goal of like adoption, not from a. I think the nuance here is that we're not going for
Hmm.
adoption for eventual
For
drug
sake.
pull and exploitation, I guess.
Or for
It's
raising a new
if,
round. Yeah.
or for raising a new round, exactly. It's more of adoption because we strongly believe that literally, like, using any other thing is like so complicated. Like, why break your head over that? Use this thing that's much more simpler and gets you much faster to your end goal of building a good search experience. Like, we
Exactly.
want the world to know that this exists, and for people to adopt it without fear of like any other things that could go wrong with like the project. So which is why I think with open source having a product that also has a clear monetization path is another thing that we like gently say. That's one of the things with cloud, for example, is we don't shy away from the fact that we do make money from Typesense, the product. And uh, but I think that's a good thing because now we have a sustainable product that can run for decades now with the revenue and the profits is bringing in. And that I wish, from for every open source project out there. It is hard. It is hard, and thankfully we're like server software. For libraries, it's probably even harder to do something like this. But I wish every open source project considers doesn't shy away from monetization, instead looks at it as a actually a selling point. Because these days, for example, when I look at any product I'm going to deeply integrate with, the first thing that I look at is if it's completely free. It like I'm like a little like hesitant
Hmm.
uh, to say, okay, what if it's not around in the next couple of years after I've deeply integrated with it, etc. So I used to think, oh, it's free, awesome, let's start using it. But once you've seen the life cycle of a couple of these products come and go, then you're like, oh, okay, you should probably keep an eye out for how they're monetizing this or how they plan to monetize it, as one of the decision factors that go into when you pick technologies for your stack.
And to sort of like reiterate, basically optimizing for adoption, you're also optimizing for the pace of learning because you're getting all this feedback. And so, what better thing than to have way too many people tell you about the problem? Because your job as your startup is to really understand the problem and then ship a solution to it. And so, you're only positioning yourself for future growth and for better revenue in the future just by doing that today. And surely it is harder. By the way, there's a lot of comments here. Michael Bramley from Venture, and
Oh, hey,
so
Michael.
and he says, no revenue is a time bomb, of course. So you can only kick the can so far ahead in the future. Now, just to double click on
Yep.
the monetization, as a founder, looking to open source our entire code base in the next months, and choosing a license, thinking about if an enterprise was to self-host it, like would they need to buy any sort of like license key or annual subscription or whatever have you, like just double clicking on the decision to not do that with Typesense. The fact that you could have contracts running in the hundreds of thousands with like some big customers that maybe they will come, right? But having the infrastructure to charge them accordingly, like you chose not to. Um,
Yep.
yeah, why did you do that?
Yeah. So we actually initially did start out experimenting with that. So we had a pro version of Typesense where we held back some of these features that we thought, okay, maybe large enterprises would appreciate. And we said, let's hold that back and put it in an enterprise license and sell that.
The open
Uh,
core model, right? That's
the
the
open
open
core
core model.
model. Yep, exactly. It did not do well at all. It was really hard to convince people to pay us at the point, because I guess people didn't see enough value in those features or whatnot, or maybe we also didn't have enough of a awareness for people to
Track
start using it.
record, yeah, all these things.
Yeah, track record, exactly. So we were still in like early stages, but uh, what ended up happening parallelly is that we also had started getting another group of customers who are like, if you had a hosted solution where I don't have to worry about running Typesense myself, I'm ready to pay you for it. I think that on one side here we are trying to push the product on on some customers and hoping they'll pay us. On the other side, people are like, here's my money, like have like if you have a hosted version, I'm ready to pay you for it. That's what was like a wake up call for us. We were like, why are we spending so much effort trying to push this other thing when people are ready to pay us for this other thing? So at that point, it was a risky decision. We spoke about it probably for like 1 or 2 weeks maybe, back and forth trying to figure out if, because we're now, once you publish, so what we were, the decision was, let's publish everything open source, even the existing enterprise features, let's just publish it open source. And then let's focus fully on like cloud being the monetization model. And that is an irreversible decision. Once you publish your code out there, it's out there. But we decided to do it, and I'm glad looking back we did that, because one of the things that ended up happening was in the next few months people did start using those features that were previously enterprise organically themselves, and then started giving us feedback on how the feature can be improved to suit their use cases better. And they've there's one user who found like a long-standing bug in one of those features. So that's when I realized, oh, it's actually holding these features back ended up us building like a less probably mature, less stable, less feature rich part of the software. But then once we open sourced it, we suddenly were able to mature it super fast, in like literally in the course of like 3 or 4 months we started getting all this feedback. So looking back, I'm glad we did that, because now every part of Typesense is open source, and people use various parts, give us feedback. In fact, we actually run the same binary that we publish open source. That's what we run in Typesense Cloud as well. So it's the identical binaries. And then on Typesense Cloud, we add all these convenience features on top, etc. And we charge for that for infrastructure. Uh, but this model, I would say, has worked out so well for us. Mainly, I don't know if it's like a special case for us, because we had users telling us that we are ready to pay you for this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's another worldview where, especially when I was talking to VCs, for example, people were like, "Hey, you're leaving money on the table, and
Right.
there are people running it at like large scale, and you're just gonna give it to them for free," type of thing. I think that's one interesting thing. Going back to the VC topic, is is I feel like the VC model is one where if you create value, you have to extract all the value and capture all the value yourself as a company. Whereas I think for us, it's more of, we've created value, we want to share that value and maybe monetize a small portion of that, and we're completely okay with like a larger portion of uh, the value that we created go unmonetized in service of all the other goals that I was telling you about before. Uh, and I think that leads to a more sustainable thing. Like, in fact, for example, another thing that we used to do was we used to sell support contracts for self-hosted
Mm.
users, and
Okay.
we thought, okay, maybe that'll be a good revenue model while also doing cloud. But that we ended up having to like deprecate, because it ended up taking too much time away from us for the amount of revenue it was bringing in, because every self-hosted installation was running on different infrastructure, and most often we ended up debugging infrastructure issues in their infrastructure instead of you know working on the product. And with Typesense Cloud, because it's a consistent infrastructure across customers, when issues happen, like we can like quickly debug it and figure out what's happening inside the software. So, and we have complete visibility into the software. So that also turned us away from like self-hosted support contracts. So yeah, so from a revenue,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or I would say the amount of effort it requires to generate revenue, we find, and the uh, versus the pain involved, I guess. With Typesense Cloud, it's well balanced. I feel like at least in Typesense as a server software type of an ecosystem, And even the a little bit of the self-hosted support contract route that we did was way too like time consuming, that we're like, this is, we didn't see it as a scalable way to scale revenue, because in that model you have to like scale up probably like even your team size to be able to service all these support things coming in. And
Yeah.
because you don't have like sufficient visibility into the infrastructure, you're like sitting around and waiting. And whereas in Typesense Cloud, if we see an issue, it's like the first thing we do is, so how do we automate it so that we this can self heal in the future. That's how we like operate in Typesense Cloud, and we have enough leeway inside of Typesense Cloud to be able to do that, which we might not have with like self-hosted installations. But that said, maybe scaling revenue for, uh, you know, is, I mean, you could potentially sign larger deals, I guess, with like
Mm-hmm.
self-hosted customers. But what I've realized with larger deals also come with larger expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes even way outsized expectations than what they're paying you. Um, and balancing that, it becomes a big effort by itself. uh, that Yeah, anyway,
Mm-hmm. It's
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 worth a
also.
shot, but for us this is what ended up working.
No, thank you so much for unpacking this. And who knows, maybe some years down the line, some bigger companies re-engage in this fashion, and maybe the model there is viable. The unit economics work. You could hire support engineer forward deployed just for that on-prem customer, for example, and it all makes sense. So, thanks so much for highlighting how it wasn't appropriate in the beginning, but maybe it works out later. And speaking of kind of like operations, I'd love to transition into learning more about how you run your business. I saw on your Twitter, a bunch of hot takes. For example, you guys have no deadlines or you don't do meetings, right? These kind of things. So definitely want to hear
Yep,
how's that
yep.
working out.
Yeah, yeah, it's probably a little controversial, untraditional way of working. But we literally do not do stand-ups. We do not do like roadmap planning. We do not do, but I guess retrospectives, like all the usual things that I've, funny story that I have initiated at other companies that I've worked at in the past. We do none of that with Typesense now. And so my mindset was, initially it was just me and my co-founder, and I thought, okay, as we added more team members, we might eventually start doing some of this. And so it was always it wasn't something like we sat down and said, okay, we're going to change how we work and this is how we're going to do it. So it was more of like, okay, let's just add the things that we need as we go along. And it turns out, even after having like 8 people, we still don't need any of those. We're just working fine without that. And the biggest thing was, uh, working without deadlines, I would say, is like a fundamental feature of how we work that allows us to work this well and this fast and build deep products. Is I think back to how Typesense, the product, came to be. Like when we started working on it, we didn't have like a, because it was like a nights and weekends project, we didn't have any deadlines for ourselves. It's just, we were like, we're trying to solve this problem that's evergreen, it's not going to go away, and what is the best way to solve it. So that's how our genesis was without any deadlines, saying here are milestones we need to hit, or here are the features we need to launch, etc. It was literally, let's just start writing code and figure out what issues we run into, keep benchmarking and keep iterating on that, until we have something that can be shared. So we wanted to bring that ethos to the rest of the team as well. As we hired additional team members, we thought, wouldn't it be nice, or wouldn't it be awesome if everyone on the team got to experience that style of working, where you're like, okay, here's something that we need to solve, and here are the customers who are telling us about this issue, so let's iterate with them and figure out how to build this in the best way possible, and service that feature end to end. And it turns out that as we build features like that, we end up also saving a lot of time that we would have otherwise wasted in, like, talking to, so instead of talking to like hundreds of customers giving you similar types of feedback around the same feature, once you launch something that's uh, half baked because you had to hit a timeline. In this case, because we're taking our time to like going deep with maybe like 4 or 5 customers using the feature, giving us feedback, we're iterating with them deeply without like any like time bounds. That, I would say, has led us to build more complete feature sets, because when we launched that feature, people, all these other edge cases that people are thinking about, we probably have run into them, as we kept iterating with, with the key select user. So now, if we had like a concrete release timeline,
Mm-hmm.
plan like a release cadence and whatnot, then it's like we're just checking a box at that point. And what I've realized is that typically the origin of deadlines is now excluding things like, let's say you're running a holiday promotion and it has to be a New Year promotion. New Year you can't change around. So sure, a deadline there is good. But outside of that, what I've otherwise seen is deadlines also get created as a way to like quote unquote motivate people to stay on
Mm-hmm.
track. That I take issue with, because
Yeah.
I think especially with software engineers love the craft of building something and seeing it come to life and people using it. Like that cycle is like the is such an amazing feeling, and the more often you keep doing that, the more satisfied you are. It's like, nice dopamine hits, I guess you could say, is like that's what, keeps software engineers ticking, I feel like. And when that natural self motivation exists, and then you add this, artificial thing called a deadline, it's usually people like are able to see through it, and then it becomes like a demotivating factor, ironically. So that's why I think without having deadlines, we're able to have the intrinsic motivation of any software engineer to keep shipping software fast to users. We're able to, I feel like propel much faster that way
Mm-hmm.
than like this carrot and stick approach with like external deadlines. So
For
I mean,
sure.
even like when we do roadmap planning, we do have like a I would say like a sliding window roadmap planning. So you have like a 2 month window, and we say, okay, roughly this is what we'll work on in the next 2 months. But then if we get any feedback from like users saying that, hey, this is really important, or suddenly this new issue was found, we then change things within that 2 month sliding window. And we're also not shy. We don't shy away from like reprioritizing. That's something that I've seen some
Mm-hmm.
companies. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you put something on the roadmap and it's like carved in stone, and if you change that around, people get really upset. That's something that we don't do specifically in here. Is like everyone works with the expectation that you could be working on something, but if something comes up, we jump into that right away. I think that helps us keep us nimble.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and also, now we do have long term plans on
Sure. Sure.
what we would like Typesense to evolve into. But
Of
what
course.
I've seen some companies do is plan out every single feature for the rest of the year and say, this is our Q4 roadmap starting in like Q1 to Q4. Here's exactly what we're going to ship. I think that's what
Yeah.
ends up like you end up shipping features just because it's on a roadmap and you have to make your manager happy. Like that's what I feel like where things go south with annual roadmap plannings. So I'd rather have like a rough idea, but then keep reprioritizing as new information shows up, as you launch features. Maybe something needs to be improved in that feature before you jump onto the next thing, right? Like, and that might have helped improve adoption of this feature that you just shipped. So you might as well focus your time on building that. Now, one example, this one
Mm-hmm.
particular feature took us almost, I would say, a year and a half, and we're still not complete with that feature, and we're completely okay with it because during this year and a half, we've gotten so much feedback from users who are using this feature that now it's at a stage where a lot of use cases are already covered because we took so much time to build it well. So, when I say no deadlines, I really mean it. Like even a year and a half project is completely okay with us. I think that's how you get to build like a very deep, stable product without, accounts for a whole bunch of different use cases.
And
And
this
again,
is
maybe thankfully we have the luxury of doing that without like timelines enforced on us by VCs. Like, we essentially have like infinite runway. So a lot of this ties back, it's all interrelated, right? Like if we had raised VC funds, I'm not sure if this can't fly. Like you have to commit to like, annual growth plans and whatnot, and what features you're building to service that growth plan and whatnot. So yeah, so all of this ties together how we do things.
the fact that the manager of the organization is speaking so enthusiastically about this mode of working. Like, first of all, that means it brings results that you're accountable for with your decisions how to run the organization. And secondly, I can only imagine how much the engineers love this, right? So surely helps with attracting the best talent to give them this kind of format for working that is the most productive. Absolutely. By
Yep.
the way, as we were scrolling your Twitter, I saw like this tweet that talked about, we were talking about VC before, just real quick, step back to it. You were saying something to the effect of how, once you're starting having a lot of conversations, you realized that there's only so much more there are to give other than just the money. In some other tweets, I also saw, though, however, that you're missing on some things by not going down the VC route, like a lot of connections they can bring or like operational knowledge. So just wanted to hear it from you, that notion. Yeah.
Yeah, so once we became profitable, after that, the VCs that reached out, our conversation was, it was before that, it was more like VCs trying to ask us what we do and like how we plan, what our growth plans were, etc. But then once we became profitable, I was like, I was able to like flip the conversation around and say, hey, money is not the constraint for us, so we're not looking to raise. But if we set that monetary aspect aside, what else can we expect when we raise money, from you as a firm? And those were some interesting conversations. Like, things I've heard are, okay, you can, once you raise from us, you'll have our brand name attached to yours, so your customers, will look at you in like favorable light. We turns out we didn't need that. I mean, we're like I said, we're doing like 11 billion searches, and without any VC brand. What I realized was, as we got customers in every single domain, the fact that an existing customer in that domain was using it is actually a much better signal to other customers in the same domain than any other like external like VC backed companies. Because at the end of the day, customers want, is it going to help me, and can I trust it to work the way? And if they see another person in the same space as them using it, it works wonders from what I've seen. So that made it was hard in the beginning, but it became easier as we started adding all these uh, logos that are well known in each of these little domains. And then I heard, oh, maybe we can help you with hiring. We have like a huge network of engineers or folks that you might need to run the company. Folks who are experienced in sales and marketing, and we can like introduce you to them and help you hire. Turns out we didn't need that either for like our like we did LinkedIn postings for a few of the roles, but otherwise it was like open. We were basically able to hire from like the open source community, people who were contributing to our open source projects, and we were like, would you want to do this full time? And we ended up hiring them. So that worked out way, like I would say this has been the easiest hiring methodology compared to all the other companies I've worked in the past, which was like elaborate things that we did. And we're able to, again, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like we have tens of millions of downloads and 11 billion searches on Typesense Cloud, and profitable. So it is working well. The other things I was like, oh, as you attract larger companies, they'll ask for compliance things, and you need like a team to run and maintain compliance. Didn't need that either.
Yeah.
Thankfully, there are a lot of compliance vendors who automate a lot of things for you, and automation is the name of the game. We were able to get a compliance vendor, and we're SOC 2 compliant and HIPAA compliant, like two stringent things going. Uh, and yeah, then they were like, oh, we can introduce you to customers who are, who might be interested in using. That did happen a few times. People were like some VCs were proactive in introducing us, but none of those panned out. I almost felt like those introduced folks were taking the meeting just as a favor for the VC, or potentially, and it felt like we were doing too much of cold selling without them actually, having a need for the product. So that also didn't pan out. Like none of the things that were mentioned to me were like uh, strong enough for us to go through all the other risk that comes with like raising VC backed or raising funds from VC firms. And that's when we were like, yeah, let's just, this is not worth, if money is not the issue, all the other things that come with VCs, I didn't see like it as being worth the risk. Now, on the flip side, typically when you raise funds, again, this is the state of the world, unfortunately. You get a lot of attention from the press when you raise funds. and everyone's like high-fiving you and like 1,000 likes on LinkedIn and Twitter and whatnot. So there is a big spotlight that's shown on you when you raise VC funds. Uh, I used to have a lot of FOMO about that in the past. It's like, are we missing out on all these? Like, are we being so stubborn that we're turning away inbound interest from VCs? Like that was something that was like a big question, that used to be on my mind. But again, once you're profitable and you're like consistently growing, none of that matters. It turns out because VC is just another asset vehicle that they themselves go raise money, invest it in other companies. So if you have that Zen mode of thinking, which is that VC is just an asset class, just like any of the other asset classes that you yourself might be investing in, right? So think of VC in that angle, not like this, oh, raising VC is going to propel my company. That's unfortunately not the truth. In fact, if the odds of success are like 50-50 when you start the company, I feel like the odds of success once you raise VC money is one becomes like 10 in 90 because the VC model by definition expects only one in 10 companies that they invest in to be successful. So they expect by definition 90% of their investments to fail, and that's how the VC, and but they expect that one company that makes it really big to cover the losses in all the other companies. And we're talking about like these VC funds typically raise hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have to like 100x their returns, which means that so much pressure is put on identifying that one company which is going to return more than, let's say, $1 billion to $10 billion maybe. And everyone is in service of that mission when you raise VC funds. Product at that point becomes like a, oh yeah, nice, this is what they do that. It becomes like a side journey almost, in my opinion, unfortunately, but that's how that asset class works. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how that investment vehicle works. And it's just that there are other ways to also raise that money without having to go through that entire stress. And I,
Like from your customers,
yeah,
for
like from your
example. Yeah.
customers. Yep, revenue funded, customer funded,
Exactly.
and
And again, your someone else's mileage might vary. I mean, all these extra benefits, the value proposition of a venture capital investors, a lot of other companies can get them. Like, so we should reiterate how this is your story of a developer tool and of an open
yep,
source developer tool. Being open source definitely helps with hiring, definitely helps
yep,
with distribution and go to market. So a lot of the value prop of the VCs maybe is like a little, diminished in this case. Um, but definitely, duly noted how this is the case for you. Again, might not be for everyone. I feel like at the end of the day, it's a
exactly.
time thing. Maybe like VC, just when you look at the equation, I mean, it all comes down to time. And for a developer tool, time is your friend. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you gotta move fast. Like a developer tool, you need years in the market for people to trust you, and for like the
Yep.
product to get great, right? And so it's special being an open source developer tool. The balances are tilted a little differently. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think yeah, like I think yeah, definitely don't want to make this sound like it's the end of, like this is the one true way to do it. That's definitely not something.
And we've
I'm
had other
saying that there are
guests who
multiple
say the
ways to do
opposite.
it.
Yes, exactly. We had other
Yep,
guests who
yep.
said actually, if you don't raise VC, you're not a tech startup. You're a mom and pop shop.
Oh, I
Exaggerated,
have heard
exaggerated,
that.
exaggerated version. But yes, absolutely. So very very
Yep,
glad
yep,
that we were able to share your story and to show people that there's another way to do it. And frankly, I've seen people do it in every way. So like, there's no one or right path. People make it work in
yep.
every way. Comes down to what's congruent with your own personality as a founder and your goals. And so, with that said, just to land this plane, are there any things that you would like to leave people with, or maybe an advice to founders who want to be like you?
Yeah, I would say, uh, so I guess I'm basically saying my thought process as I post on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
these days, which is to expect things to take a long time. I think that's where founders are surprised. Like even myself, I guess I was surprised how long it took us to reach this stage, where it's like, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years before we were like comfortable. Uh, and that the you want to plan for that as a founder. Like if you have an idea don't like the first thing hopefully should not be how am I going to raise funds to to pay myself while I work on this. I think that you have to flip that around and say, okay, let's first find a initial set of users who this problem might be burning enough that I can go at least pitch a potential idea to them and say, if I had like a little prototype, see if they are willing to, if that solves the problem enough that they're willing to pay you for it. I think if you flip that around, in instead of making your first money from external investors, if you try to make, if your goal is trying to make money from your customers first, and this is regardless of whether you eventually choose to raise VC funds or self fund, that initial dollar that you make, I think if you have a plan to make that from customers, that I think avoids a lot of like you know going off
in the wrong
in like
direction.
tangents that are not eventually going to be profitable for you or useful for you, because at the end of the day, so if someone's willing to pay you for it, it's and you find are able to find enough of those customers, that's what is going to make your business run. It's not a constant influx of like external fronts outside of the company. So whether so the faster you are able to find that formula out, and the better it's going to be. But the definition of fast there, I've come to realize, is at least 5 years. So you want to plan for that. Whether so, like I would say, if you have an idea, like don't quit your job just yet. Go build it on like the side, like nights and weekends, and like do it on like a consistent basis, even if it's like 30 minutes to an hour every day. That consistency over a long period of time is what ends up adding up. Like again, that's case in point with us as well, which is consistency over the first 5 6 years, doing it as like a nights and weekends thing, or 5 years as a nights and weekends thing. And then only then we saw traction, and then we were like, let's capitalize on this and jump into it full time. So the earlier you do it, the more riskier it gets, the more stressful it gets. And I feel like once you add this runway thing in your head, suddenly you'll notice that your problem solving, your creativity, all of that also starts shrinking, because you have this real constraint that worries you. So if you can remove that by not having deadlines and not having financial things as a thing, by doing it as a side project, that's how I would say the best way to get started with a startup, and plan for that to take a long time, as you bring something to life.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. This is a perfect way to close it. And for people who want to learn more and to get started with Typesense, let's give them a final call to action.
Oh yeah, I mean, head on over to Twitter. It's at Typesense, or my personal Twitter at Jason Bosco, or typesense.org is our domain. You'll be able to find any of these links through any of those. Yeah, come
Love it.
check us
Love it.
out. And yeah, on my Twitter, I post about our company building journey. So uh, go check it out.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. I hope we get the chance to repeat this in a few years, and we'll see where everyone is at there. Thank you so much once again for making the time, Jason. Amazing story.
Awesome.
Very, very excited to share this. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you again.